I remember seeing a rating that John F. Kennedy would be the most overrated president in American history. And I had to make this video because I think that is so wrong. If you ask me, I would say Kennedy is even an underrated president. And I'll tell you why. Actually, I prefer not to say that clearly what I think about an American president, and there won't be too many videos like that probably. But in this case, I think that was simply necessary. Today, I presume to say that there is something all those experts are missing, but hey, I've been into the topic almost for 10 years now as well. First of all, I do actually understand the reason why some experts say Kennedy is overrated. I think the argument is that many people know Kennedy many more than they do know other presidents. Those people see the myth Kennedy, it's called myth Kennedy in Germany, is it called like this in the US as well? However, they do not have a justification looking at the presidency, the things that happened in Kennedy's presidency. Those experts probably think that the people just look at the character they see. And maybe that's not even wrong. Maybe many people look at the character John F. Kennedy and not at the things that happened in Kennedy's presidency. It is true that Kennedy's presidency was short, not even 3 years. I recently made a video saying that 4 years are not enough to make any great achievements. 3 years, not even 3 years. How shall this be enough? That's true. But there are things in Kennedy's presidency we have to look at. Always positively mentioned as a Kennedy achievement is the way he solved the Cuban Missile Crisis, also by most experts. An argument is that there are not many things looking at domestic politics that happened in Kennedy's presidency. But let's start speaking about the Cuban Missile Crisis, because we may not just look at the moment. At the moment of the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was very important that Kennedy and Khrushchev found a solution for that problem. But I think Kennedy and Khrushchev also gave a direction for the rest of Cold War. And I think this Cuban Missile Crisis is a reason why the Cold War stayed a Cold War, did not escalate. With the atomic bomb, man created a weapon that is able to erase all people in the world, to erase mankind. I think the fact that it was that close but did not escalate, that Khrushchev and Kennedy saw, okay, it is better if we find a compromise here, if we find a diplomatic solution, it is better than to destroy the world. The situation that we saw, that there is nothing worth, no ideology, no differences is worth to destroy the whole mankind or big parts of mankind. I think that was very important. For sure, those arguments are a little bit hypothetical to point out Kennedy's importance here. Yes, but I think this perspective is worth to be mentioned. And I'm not alone with the opinion that the detente politics from the 1970s are a direct consequence of the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now we look at domestic politics, the big factor why so many people say, okay, yeah, Kennedy, he was probably a very strong leader, but his term was much too short to achieve anything. Why do we just have to look at his term? In 1964, that was actually still Kennedy's term. He was assassinated and LBJ took over, but it was in the 4 years Kennedy himself was elected for. The Civil Rights Act was passed. And it's not that LBJ did the complete opposite of what Kennedy had intended. LBJ passed it, Kennedy had the idea. Before he was assassinated, that was his own term, Kennedy assured that black people get access to academic education also in the last states in the United States. In some states, people still try to block that. And to assure that, Kennedy even used the military to stop those who wanted to stop a black man from entering a university. And also in his term, Kennedy did the pre-work for a new healthcare act. Who passed that law? Lyndon Johnson. Honestly, this was already the term LBJ was elected for himself. But if we look at the pre-work Kennedy did, it gets clear that this has Kennedy's handwriting somehow, more or less. Concretely, Kennedy had planned a healthcare law supporting people over 65. The law LBJ was to support low-income families and people over 65. So there is a clear similarity and there is a clear handwriting from Kennedy. So the connection between Kennedy's idea and LBJ's actual law is clear. And it's not just that, we also have to look at the fact that Kennedy had strong resistance in the Congress in his term. In LBJ's term there was much less resistance. Kennedy even had resistance from Democrats. And I think the reduction of resistance in the Congress can also be referred to Kennedy's popularity, to the admiration people had for Kennedy. I think that is also something that we have to say about a president. Okay, his time himself was short, but he made it that those who came after him can go on where he stopped. Let's just look at the politics currently. 4 years Party A, party loses. Party B does the exact opposite of what Party A did. 4 years later, Party A again does the exact opposite of what Party B did. In general, it is very difficult to achieve anything if this goes on. Kennedy, however, achieved that after himself being president, it is still possible to continue his work. In Kennedy's case, however, it was possible, even though his term was very short, that the people after him can continue his work, that progress is possible. Kennedy's predecessor Eisenhower is mainly remembered as a good president. I do not want to contest that, but there is something which is often forgotten, namely that in Eisenhower's second term, the economical was rather difficult. It became better still in Eisenhower's term, but something which can be considered a good economy, from my point of view, a better economy, only came under John F. Kennedy. And assuring a good economy, from my point of view, is one of the most important tasks politics, therefore also a president, has. Yeah, am I the only wise man in the world? I'm not. I just think that those factors should gain a little more weight looking at how good a president was, and that those things should also be taken into consideration if we speak about John F. Kennedy. And there is another thing which happened years after Kennedy's term, but it is impossible to deny the direct correlation between Kennedy and this historic happening. Neil Armstrong becomes the first man to step on the moon in 1969, already in Richard Nixon's term. Kennedy announced, "We choose to go to the moon and do the other things not because they are easy, but because they are hard to achieve." And Kennedy announced that the United States would fly to the moon within 10 years. And in the end, Kennedy was already dead, but he achieved what he had promised. It was in 2015 when it was said that in 10 years, would have been 2025, people would fly to the Mars. Kennedy announced that the US would fly to the moon within 10 years, and it actually happened. For sure, the distance between Earth and Moon and Earth and Mars, there's a little difference, I agree on that, but we may also not forget that between 1969 and 2025 are over 50 years of technological development, more than a half century. The time distance between the invention of airplanes and the moon landing is not much longer than between 1969 and 2025. For sure, Kennedy is not the only person who is responsible for that technological development. But without Kennedy putting so much effort into that mission, it would have been impossible. The question which remained is whether this is a political thing or whether it's just about science. I mean, how important it is to bring people to the moon can be seen by the fact that the last mission to the moon, except the one that just happened, was in 1973. So we had lived for over 50 years without bringing people to the moon. So it is actually possible to live without that. I agree on that, but we may not forget that there was indeed a political factor that we have to look at. By the time of Kennedy's term, it had looked like as if the Soviet Union left the United States behind in terms of space travel. Almost every big achievement by that time came from Russia. First satellite, first dog in space, first man in space, and the United States had to react. I can't deny that this was also about honor, but there was one thing very important, because the technology used for space travel can also be used for arms. By times of Cold War, it was important to show that the United States are able to compete with that. Furthermore, in the past, it was a big topic whether the space could be used for military reasons. A few years after Kennedy's term, there had been an agreement that space may only be used for peaceful reasons, for science. But by that time, the opportunity was there, and therefore the United States had to react to show we are not left behind in technological progress. And therefore, the United States needed a mission which would even be bigger than bringing people to space. And the best solution there was to bring people to the moon. Until today, the moon landing is much more popular, I guess, than the first journey to space. At school, we learned much earlier about Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon. Then we learned about Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space. In the end, what is more important? Both things were very important for science. By the times of Cold War, it was of course very important to show we did the better thing. So what is my conclusion in the end? To create a system that keeps working for you, does what you want to do over your own time, and having a system that works as long as you're there and does not work on it when you're gone. Some experts might not agree with what I say, and that's okay. If you disagree, just let me know in the comments, please. I think that's a topic we can debate about very good. To answer my question from the thumbnail, is John F. Kennedy the greatest American president ever? Well, I wouldn't call Kennedy the best president in American history, but I would say that John F. Kennedy is a top 5 president. That's my personal hot take. You can agree, you can disagree. If you are interested in my personal GOAT, my personal greatest president of all time, let me know in the comments. Maybe I will also make a video about that. As I said in the beginning, I don't feel that comfortable speaking that clearly about what I think about American presidents. I prefer to analyze certain situations, but if you want to, maybe I will make it. And in case you said, well, this video was interesting and what he says does not sound that wrong, I appreciate every subscriber on this channel. Thank you for watching.